Oh, yay. Okay. Welcome to the Junk Art Therapy Podcast. I'm Kristy with my amazing friends and fellow art therapists, Josée and Nat. Together, we're diving into the messy, magical world of art therapy, what it means, how it works, and how it shapes the way we see the world. Grab a seat, maybe an old tire or a bed of moss, and join us as we uncover the meaningful in the messy. So I thought we would start with José's favorite, an icebreaker.
It doesn't count as an icebreaker if we've known each other for this long. This is
Oh,
just going to be fun now.
oh no. Okay, good. Opening question is if art therapy was an object in a junkyard, what would it be and why? Nat?
Yeah, I can go. When I think of a modern junkyard, for better or for worse, I think of birds. So that's not really an object. I'm always messing with the prompt. You'll see that. I think one of the, like a bird feathering its nest, flying curiously over all the colorful bits and pieces, picking and collecting the ones they find shiny or colorful or interesting for some reason, and weaving those together, like sort of unhurried and trusting something will come of the process. Yeah, like that.
I immediately was like, I am that miscellaneous, like art therapy to me in a junkyard is that miscellaneous object that everyone has no idea what it is, but it is somehow useful to everyone. So it's got like gears on it and like something sharp so you could cut things with it if you needed to cut something to let it go. It's also something that can help you build other objects. So it's like kind of like a Swiss Army knife, but like a lot more junky looking than a Swiss Army knife. Like you only know about what it is if you're really looking at it, and it just kind of becomes what you need. That was the first thought I had in my head, at least.
I love these answers. Yeah, something kind of robotic or with gears or something that when I saw like a music box or like there's like an old, it's not that old. Okay, it depends on how old I am, but there's an old cartoon about like the nightingale story and there's like a robotic nightingale. It's not a it's like an old robot. So what would you call that? Steampunk robot of a like nightingale. And that's what I imagine. It would be this thing that would be maybe at first appear a little bit broken and a little bit confusing, and then it would ask you to tinker with it. It would be something that would kind of sit in your mind, and it would invite you over without you really even realizing that you're hearing that, and you would find yourself interacting with it and having an experience with it.
I like that. The curiosity.
And it's an experience. It's not
Yeah,
a thing.
definitely.
Totally. The next little section that I have on a roadmap is how we found art therapy. So the start of this is that we all met at Katie. We call it Katie, but it's the Kootenai Art Therapy Institute.
Not
In
catty.
sorry,
Not catty.
when you get there, if you don't know that, and everyone is talking about Katie,
I know I'm just saying it because at the conference, a lot of people think it's catty. And then I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, I go to Katie.
so Katie, the Kootenai Art Therapy Institute, and we took the 2 year master's equivalent diploma we were class of 2024. My next question is if we could go back in time and think about what was it that got us to art therapy, Katie, in the first place?
I went first last time, just sitting on my laurels.
Mine's the worst story though. I feel like I have to go last because it was like by accident. I had no idea what I was doing. Like,
Happy accident? I hope.
yeah, totally. I guess I can go first then. It's
Yeah.
fine. So I found Katie by accident. Actually, not even just Katie, art therapy in general. I had been working in sales and marketing and business development for my entire career up until that point. And then I had a pivot, and a fellow Kootenai Art Therapy Institute grad was like, why have you never considered art therapy? And I was like, well, because I don't have a degree in psychology. I have a degree in sociology. And she dead ass looked me in the face and went, so do I. So I don't know what you're talking about. And then I was like, oh. And then she told me that they had accepted her in as equivalents because the backgrounds were very similar. And so I applied very last minute. And I got confirmation that I was accepted to start in September in, I think it was August 10th. So I had less than a month. And we were in the process of we were in the process of moving up north at that point, and the only spot was available for me was on campus. So we shifted gears for a year and stayed in Nelson for a year, and I was very happy to find what I found with art therapy. So yeah, it was a very happy accident, but there was something about it that felt the entire time like I was in the right place doing the right thing. So art therapy, what drew me in was just, I don't know. I had no idea what it was. So curiosity was really, which seems crazy to say that I committed to a 2-year master's equivalent diploma program with no idea of what I was actually doing. But I knew that counseling was not the route I wanted to go, even though that was where I was being drawn to for a long time. And something about this was hitting all the boxes of what a counseling degree was kind of missing for me. So I'm very happy I ended up where I did. And now I'm a professional art therapist to show for it. So yeah, I can pass it off to one of you two. Tell me your story.
I think we're going to find out like something about how you became an art therapist has a lot to do with how you practice art therapy too.
Totally.
Like, it's sort of outside the box, hey?
Yeah, definitely.
That wasn't required to get there. Yeah.
I would consider myself an artist, even though I sometimes wrestle with that term and identity, which I think is also probably why I've ended up in this mess. But I've always loved art, and I've loved art and creativity in so many different ways. I have a theater background. I do fine art, animation, digital art, music, digital music production. I don't really play an instrument. I did some singing though. So I've kind of have some knowledge and some experience in a whole bunch of different arts. And I think artists really look at the world in a really different way. Maybe we don't. Maybe we just see it really clearly. But there is something about following this like inner pull. And I feel like I am just an artist in search of an art. And my journey through all of the different things that I have done, different arts that I've tried and I've pursued, have led me to one, a hugely deep appreciation of metaphor and the workings of the mind. I think because of artists' reflective nature, we spend a lot of time within ourselves. And I think that sometimes that can be a really dark place, not just for artists, but for everyone. But artists find a way to keep exploring that space. And I think because of that and my love of art, it led me into some pretty dark places. And art therapy was the next one on the journey that I had to get into to start to integrate even deeper some of these learnings that I have through all of these artistic processes. So I guess I'm hoping that art therapy allows me to explore the art of being a human, which is maybe the art that I've always been most interested in.
I just can't wait to hear everyone talk about the kind of how they see what is art therapy and how do you practice, because I feel like something I'm listening because I know you both and how like what brought you to art therapy continues like a thread through how maybe you practice and what it actually means to you, and therefore like how do you bring it to the world. I just can't wait for the next one. It's so much different to hear you speak it than to think my own story. I know you both know this. I came to art therapy because I had been going to a drop-in open studio with my kids who were young, and we were showing up each week, and we were sort of making spontaneous art and using whatever materials were available. And I remember so clearly sitting with my kids watching. I didn't make any art, and I've taken them both to an independent school, a Nelson Waldorf school, and they have this real head, heart, and hands values that everyone should really express themselves with their hands. And if you don't know how to use these phalanges, then it can be really hard to express yourself. So they start really young, they learn to knit, they learn to draw, not with an idea of like producing something perfect, but just having capacity. And I remember the time that I heard that there was an art therapy group for parents. And I just leapt at this opportunity to give that a try. And I made art for the first time for myself, for the first time since I was a kid. And it was messy and it was simple and it was glorious and I couldn't stop and I just lost myself. And it was like a fresh start. So once I had had that experience for myself, I thought, wow, like I really want to know more about how to offer this now that my children have already sort of received the gift, but myself, there's got to be other folks out there who haven't touched a pencil since somebody criticized their art in first grade. So yeah, I really wanted to know more, and I was trying to offer this in my own family life and participate in my community, and I was just really struggling on how to get started. And if this was a roadmap for me, maybe then I could also take something for myself and maybe even use it afterwards. It was really it was a learning opportunity for myself first and foremost. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The follow-up question is to get a little bit a deeper dive into what is art therapy. So I'm going to start with reading a definition I have, which is art therapy is a broad term with deep roots. When properly facilitated, it can draw on our innate creativity to help us heal, grow, and transform. And this definition is from the CATA website, and CATA is the Canadian Art Therapy Association website. So that's what it says on their homepage. And if you click on the link of what is art therapy, it follows with art therapy combines the creative process and psychotherapy, facilitating self-expression and understanding using imagery, color, and shape as a part of creative therapeutic process. Thoughts and feelings can be expressed that would otherwise be difficult to articulate. So with that definition, it then goes into talk about how important the training of art therapists and the presence of art therapists are. But I would love to pose that question to you, Josée and Nat. How would you define art therapy?
I remember when we talked about this before, and I keep saying that I get really excited about art therapy, and I'm still not really good at being concise about what it is and what it isn't. I like that CATA definition because it's pretty clear. But then when I'm talking with folks, even if I were to use those words, psychotherapy and art making or creative expression, I find that I always get into having to offer an example. I don't know about you. I end up explaining that I think, art is a deeply healing process, that people have always sang and danced and made marks on the wall and in order to make sense of their world. And that I usually say something around the start therapy. I think this is what we shared last time, is that this meaning like helping folks find a safe enough space to allow them to start playing out and expressing what they're thinking and feeling, even if they haven't done that for a long time, even if they've never really done it, even if they don't identify as being an artist. And once they figure out how to do that on their own, that really my work is mostly done. That it's sort of this remedial therapy piece is done. And then it's just creating a space where that can happen again and again, either witnessed or on their own. Really just finding a way to get back to expressing oneself, playing, making marks in the presence of others.
And I remembered last time you had something where we both started nodding, and it was totally the start therapy. And I was like, oh, that is brilliant. Love that. And like, I don't know, for me, with what art therapy is something that I discovered through going to school for it too, was that art making is so innately human. And we've just been taught to put these roadblocks up in our modern society to kind of separate us from that. And art making as a therapeutic process has been around for a long time. If you know any artists and you ask them about their art, you'll hear stories and layers and things, and that's not by accident. I do love Kata's definition for us as art therapists, but I find for anyone who's like curious about art therapy that the definition can be kind of daunting because it's so many big words. So I always kind of try to reflect back, kind of like you said, with examples, but also with like questions like, oh, like, what could you be looking for? Who are you inquiring for? Because I found when I was working at, well, not working, I had a community art set up with a fellow art therapist, Pam Garner of Otter Bear Studios, shout out there, here in northern BC. And often people were asking for other people. There were a few people that were curious from themselves. So it was kind of good to get an understanding because then you can kind of offer art therapy in a way that's relevant for them. So not everything is going to be relevant for them. If they have a child who has major social anxiety, a group starting with a group art therapy session is not going to be for them. So talking about how individual art therapy might look or might work. Alternatively, if there's a kid who's working on social connection and curious and just struggling to make those friendships happen, talking about how group therapy could works great too. So I kind of, as much as having a definition is great, the person-centeredness in me always wants to walk alongside and that finding out what they might be curious about art therapy for. So lots of different ways. And art as therapy falls under the art therapy umbrella too. So that's often things. I don't know if everyone else's Instagram is as full as mine is with Instagram reels of like mindfulness, art activities, or things to work with Zentangles. So art as therapy is something that you can do at home that you can take away from art therapy as well. So
I love that you remembered to mention art as therapy, because that can either be a door into art therapy or it can be something that comes after you've worked with a therapist, is then now to feel like maybe that's for you if you didn't feel like you could access those things before. So it's sort of wrapping around and really empowering others to have their own personal practice, right?
totally.
To really turn towards their own ideas of what is healing once they have a little bit of more access, maybe some support to get started. Yeah. How about you, Kristy?
I go with a pretty simple definition when someone asks me what art therapy is, which I do feel like if you're an art therapist or if you say that you've studied art therapy, like everyone's immediate question is, what is art therapy? And I kind of feel like my answer is a bit flippant, but it works for me. So I asked them if they know about uh, talk therapy. So working with a psychologist. And many people know a little bit about that. And they say, oh, yeah, I've been told I should see a psychologist. And, and that's usually what in psychology, in working with a psychologist, we do either it's a dialogue and we use words. And with art therapy, instead of having most of the conversation happen in words, we have that conversation through the creative process. And that'll be in the act of creating, as well as if the person is interested in the discussion of the art that is created. I do think we talk about it a lot in terms of it's more of a process. It's art therapy is more process based. So we're actually trying to be more aware of the creation of the art. But I think that's for me, art therapy is talk therapy, except we're going to use the art to have the conversation. Yeah. And I feel like I should just mention, because it's come up, we've both kind of said it a few times. I forgot to hit record. So we've recorded this. We have, air quote, recorded once already. I forgot to hit record. I feel like that is a part of doing podcasts is you have to at least once, and I'm sure multiple times, forget to hit record. So we have talked through this whole thing once before, and we are coming back to try again. So whether that is, it's always going to be imagining what what we said before, but hopefully we can capture some of the juiciness of what we got last time in this second recording.
You know what I remember from the first time is that when we talked about what is art therapy or how do we talk about art therapy when we meet folks for the first time, or even family members or other therapists, is that we often, I know that I mentioned, and that you did too, what art therapy is not. And somehow that kind of bookends creating some space. So I love this description that art therapy could be talk therapy, done in a different way for similar sort of outcomes ultimately, but it's also what it's not. And so some of those assumptions around who interprets the art, if we do look at the art, if that's part of the process, what happens in that, who's doing the talking. And just how often I find myself using those words that you used, Josée, which is this is an opportunity to be alongside someone in a really safe place, to look at your own art, to sort of examine your own process and see what comes up, and have that witnessed and have somebody to banter with, but not necessarily rely on anybody else's interpretation or worry that that might be what comes to you when you share your art, either with an individual, with a therapist, or with a group. So it's not that. I do find myself clarifying that piece when the look comes over someone's face. There's a particular look.
Yeah. Very, very, very important part. Because I actually feel like when I talk to teenagers about art therapy who have no idea what it could be or is, their immediate thing is like, oh, like you're gonna be telling me I'm crazy through ink blots and stuff. And I'm like, no, that's really far from what we actually do. And it's interesting. I'm so glad you pointed out the talk therapy is art therapy kind of thing too, Kristy, because I've also, after a regular amount of sessions, had individuals show up and go, I don't need to make art today, I just need to talk. And so it can kind of become that space that, I don't know, like Hermione's bag. It just amalgamates to show up, or the room of requirement. There we go. Better. That's a better metaphor there. It just shows up as what you need it to be in that space and time. And one day you can show up and you might need to throw paint on a wall. We'll set up so that that can be a possibility for you, hopefully. And another day you might show up where you don't need to make art at all. Or there might be a day where you're working with something that you just need to get it out, but in a much more slow process. And we could do something like ink pouring or watercolor. And speaking of like having forgotten to record last time or missed the record button, mistake making is something we highly encourage as art therapists because we learn. And we don't get enough opportunities in every day to make mistakes that are not so guarded or then reprimanded for, or this or that or this. So yeah, there's a lot of things that art therapy is, and I don't think they can always just be captured in one definition, as hard as we might try. So I think the beautiful thing about art therapy is we can show you what art therapy is. And hopefully, I really do hope that that's kind of partially what we accomplish in this podcast, to kind of keep people's curiosity about art therapy, to understand a little bit more about what the process could look like, and to just understand how 3 different but similar art therapists might work in the different scenarios. So, yeah.
I think a lot of people, therapy, I think for a lot of people, like it hits people different ways. And I think a lot of people, they think that in therapy, someone is going to tell them how to be or what they're doing wrong, or like, fix them. But even in therapy, I don't think that many psychologists would say that's what happens. Like we have this weird we have we have this weird idea that the therapist is the one who's going to look at us and go like, this is what must happen, or the ink blot, this thing that you drew means this. But it's really, I think in both fields, it's really not that. It is an opportunity to be in the presence of a safe person, a person that understands the process and that is willing to be alongside. And I love the art. I love art therapy because I love the separation, because art, instead of it being words, which unless you're recording them, it's really, you're not hearing them the way that they were said the first time. You're only ever hearing them in your memory. And with art therapy, we're taking it, we're making something, and we actually have something outside of ourselves, and we have an experience that is outside of ourselves that we can reference. So yeah, I think both are, yeah, it's a lot of people. I mean, I walked into the art therapy program thinking, someone was going to fix me, and that I was going to learn how to be fixed and how to fix others. And it's really the only person that can make any sort of change in your life really is yourself. You can have experiences with others that can influence the way that you behave. However, it's always your choice and what you do that defines who you are. So I think art therapy, it is really, yeah, as both of you have mentioned, that walking alongside, that ability to hold the container so that someone can have an experience with themselves through art.
So someone can have an experience with themselves through art, and there's an assumption there that the art can hold whatever that experience is. It's sort of like low stakes risk taking, a safe space, a liminal space, a space, time outside of time to try something new, to do it in a playful way, in a messy way, in a deliberate way, but definitely outside of day to day. A place to have something new happen, potentially, right? A new experience.
In saying that, that's a great segue to when we found a great or meaningful experience in art therapy. So in our schooling, we would often go on Fridays and have our own experience of being art therapy participants in a way. It was a little different than most individuals would experience group art therapy in that we didn't always have a frame of what we were working on that week. We often, in art therapy groups at least, will offer something called invitations, or what I call invitations, and I'm sure Nat and Kristy do, because I feel like that's how it was often offered to us at school. And invitations are always optional, but they kind of give us a starting point for a session. So we have our own experiences for art therapy as participants too, not just art therapists. We don't just go through school and then start working with people without having any experiences of our own, which is a really important part of training to be an art therapist in a program like the one that we did. I know last time I talked about my meaningful experience where I found that I was using paint that was always left over from an individual that I'd worked with. The next day, I would always put a little cap on it because it was Thursday evenings, and then I would put it in the fridge, and then I would pull it out in the morning, and I would get to work, and I just started making this piece that layered and layered and layered and layered over time, probably about, oh God, at least 6 weeks. And I would leave it and come back to it, leave it and come back to it. And it ended up turning into kind of a self-portrait, which was really fascinating to me because that's something that I, first off, never thought I could do. Second off, I practice photography and was a photographer prior to coming to the art therapy program. And I did a lot of self-portraiture work. So creating something like that felt very daunting when I couldn't specifically control exactly what the outcome was going to be. But yeah, it was a piece that has stuck with me for the last 2.5 years. So that to me felt like a really meaningful impact. And yeah, I'm curious if any of you have stories too.
Before I went to Katie, the Kootenai Art Therapy Institute, I took one of their online courses on materials, and I don't think I followed the invitation exactly right. I think it was just to make a creature out of material that we had around the house. But, being someone who has a bit of an art material addiction, of course, I had like lots of fabric and lots of different materials to actually fashion a little creature. And my creature, as I was making it, I realized that to me, what I was creating was what I call a blue monster, and the blue monster to me is my term that I use to represent low moods. Some people might call it symptoms of depression, but that's for me whenever I get into a state. I know Churchill called it the black dog. I call it the blue monster. So I created a blue monster, and it was actually kind of cute. This very designed, blue based, button eyed, giant mouth because it always just like swallows me whole and holds me. As I was creating it, yeah, it wasn't this scary terrible monster. It was this coping mechanism. It was this thing that was trying to protect me from something else. And the act of creating it and putting it outside myself helped me to start that dialogue between me and my low moods, and started to see it instead as this awful, terrible thing that I could not escape. It started to allow me to have a different kind of relationship with it, realizing that sometimes this blue monster came upon me when I was overtired or was overwhelmed, and that it was actually trying, and maybe it's not best way, trying to help me cope. And so yeah, whenever I am feeling a little down or a little blue, I often think of this fuzzy little creature that I made, and realize I try to hold it with a little bit more understanding and a little bit more love and appreciation for what it is trying to do. So that for me was a really, really, really meaningful experience, because it did change my perspective on something that I had always held as a huge flaw, and something that I felt like I had to overcome or, destroy or get rid of, and realizing that, it's a part of me, and it's actually a part of what helps me cope in a world that I don't always completely understand. That's the blue monster.
Thanks, Kristy. It's funny, I'm going through my head as I'm listening to you both, and I'm imagining some of the materials that we have as art therapists, where we talk about what are some of the benefits of art therapy, like what are some things that we can accomplish through this process. And I'm thinking about artist identity, self-compassion. It's like, oh, look at them, they're just popping up as we share our own stories. And interesting that these meaningful experiences with art therapy happen either before we took the training together or early on. And I think about that for myself too, how that kind of, I guess, fueled my desire to continue and to really drink the Kool-Aid and start to really understand what was possible, even from what I originally thought. I heard about art therapy, but then it was my own experiences of change and growth and surprise that definitely kept me motivated to train and to pursue it even now. I think last time we had this conversation, I shared that I joined a parent group years ago, and years before I actually came to training in art therapy myself. And that's where, for the first time, I had an experience of creating a piece of art and showing it to anybody else as an adult. I mean, I'm sure that happened. I'm sure I had that experience as a child, but I had really never had that experience as an adult. I had made things in private before, and had never really felt comfortable sharing anything that I had made. And so there I was. If I remember correctly, I was in a group for parents, art therapy once a week, very general invitations each week. And I remember the painting. I remember, big butcher block paper and tempera paints and a large brush, and not a lot of expectation around what the outcome would be, and just moving colors that were soothing for me, and movement. And I hadn't really thought about sharing the picture when I was making it. I was just really, for the first time in a long time, enjoying exploring color and movement, and kind of really lost in the process. We were all sitting at separate tables. It kind of felt like I was alone, like I had the safety of that kind of experience, even though I was in a group. And then the group sort of, we finished art making time, and we were all invited to come sit in a circle, and if we wanted to share what we had made. And I remember the flip in my body, my nervous system just being like, what? Like, you want me to, oh, I thought we were all having this experience side by side, but I never anticipated that whatever I had made would be something that I would show anyone else. I don't know how I actually got into that group without understanding that process, but I did. I just jumped in. I didn't really know what it was all about. And I was so nervous. I've always had really debilitating stage fright, but I don't know. I guess I had already signed up for something new. So I remember it was all I could do to just like stand up and hold my painting in front of me for others to look at. And I was shaking, and I didn't even try to talk. And I've actually got the image right here. I know that we're on a podcast here, but I have to show you. I don't know if I can get the reflection off. Yeah. That was the very first thing I ever painted in art therapy. It's just these color swirls of blue and spirals and a little bit of pinks and purples. And I remember what it felt like to make that. And I remember standing there and again feeling overwhelmed with the exact feeling I had had when I was making it, but now I was being looked at while I was having those emotions in the group. And if you had told me that morning that's what I was going to experience, I wouldn't have gone. I would have assumed that I would have just dried up right there in front of everyone. But I didn't. I stood there overwhelmed with feeling, with all of these, and looking up, and all these women looking back at me, beaming and smiling, and tears in their eyes, just resonating with the feeling that I was having in that moment, and really seeing the painting, really seeing the beauty in it, really reflecting back to me the beauty of that moment for myself, and just like something kind of cracking open. And instead of me kind of dying on the spot, which I would have anticipated would have happened, it didn't. It was just like something really melted, something kind of broke open in my heart. And it was very healing. It was very healing to stand there and be witnessed in something very vulnerable for myself, and have it be a completely different experience than I'd ever had before in being seen that way, or in at least how I interpreted it. So I think back to that moment of such a surprise. I think that's what I love about art therapy, is that whether it's that kind of moment or another, it's like just this ability to have a new experience with vulnerability, a new experience with any kind of content that might be rambling around inside, to bring it out into the light, and either with a therapist or with a group, to live something new. I just think about how talk therapy in my own experience has often been casting back or casting forward and using one's imagination, but my body doesn't always come along. But this was just a full new embodied experience, the meaning of which I got to make later. So yeah, a real opportunity for change, a real embodied opportunity for change. Yeah, that had me hooked.
I'm so glad you showed your art. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I remember being really, really nervous, and I hadn't done anything with a paintbrush in a long time. And so I just started painting something that made me feel good. I think that's exactly what was invited. It was like, hey, if you're nervous, if you're feeling uncomfortable, what do you need to feel comfortable? And so that's what came out on the page. And as those feelings came up, standing in front of a group of like stage fright and being perceived and like not knowing whether that was safe, and then looking at that beautiful, soothing image, and then having those two things happen simultaneously, was like, oh, that's new. That was new. It was a new experience. Yeah.
For you, Nat, it was the experience for you. And I've had experiences of this too, but in your story, there was very much like this sharing aspect of it was what is a very important part of it. Obviously, you had the reconnecting to the materials and the soothing aspect of the colors that you chose, as well as the way that you painted it, but the actual sharing of it. And I think so many people have had, I mean, public speaking is like, no, most people hate public speaking. So like, I think in art therapy, not only is it the opportunity to experience art as therapy, where the process of making the art is the healing experience, there is something about the witnessing that can also be so healing and so important, because often that is where our injuries lie.
Yeah, I think about when people say that, trauma happens in relationship and healing happens in relationship. And so, yeah, that for me, that was something I didn't know that I needed. Like that was what was such a, if someone had offered me the opportunity to do like exposure therapy to being witnessed, I mean, I'm like, I have a long history with that, of being witnessed and having it go really poorly for me, and understanding that it was a relational approach that would make that safe enough for that to have a new experience. And yeah, and ever since then, I think that's really informed my interest in art therapy as practice, but then how I practice, first and foremost, uh, relationally safe and invited and welcoming and consent, and really working really hard to make a safe space, not only physically, but emotionally, relationally for folks.
Also, it's recognizing that sometimes as art therapists, we can create the container and we walk alongside, but there are moments too where you can trust your process and get what you need out of your process without necessarily having to share as well. Because I believe like the piece that I created, I never shared in group. I never shared with an art therapist, but having worked along that process for so long in that space that felt really safe and really open to me following this thread where it was going was really powerful in itself for me too. So there's a whole bunch of layers there that probably can't be broken down quite into this one little intro episode that we're starting with. But yeah, I definitely think for me, and it's something that I've now recognized throughout my work as important for some individuals too. Just to kind of know that you're not going to be pushed into anything either. When you're ready to do it, you can do it. We will trust that you will get there. And the only person who's going to know that is you. So in that case, for me, I got to the point I needed to go without having to share this in a group setting or without having to share this directly with an art therapist. But I got to work through that process in an art therapy space. So if I needed something or the tools were arising, or not tools, sorry, if the emotions were starting to bubble up, I was in a space where normally if I start a project, I am implored by individuals around me to finish it. So it felt really good that I could just walk away from this when I needed space and then come back to it when I needed to without someone leaning over my shoulder, critiquing what I did or wondering if I'm going to finish it or anything like that. So the space in itself holds a lot of, value's the wrong word, holds a lot of potential for healing in any facet, in any way that it ends up showing up for you. And the important thing to remember when we're talking about art therapy, I find, is always, and I guess, sorry, not always, because this is just the way I know the three of us all focus our practice on, but being exceptionally person-centered in that, yeah, we innately trust that you know where you're going to go with it and that you have the capacity to get there.
Yeah, it's quite something to be trusted deeply by another person, to allow oneself to trust yourself.
Yeah.
I think I really experienced that too. Yeah, being held in a really safe container and a safe relationship, and not necessarily stared at, witnessed in the sense of being held, being next to, and then borrowing, if you will, borrowing some of that confidence, some of that trust to explore with myself.
Yeah, I like that idea of borrowing. That makes me feel too like I have a photo of my piece. I don't have my physical piece with me, so I'll share a quick picture just because we saw Nat's, we saw Kristy's. Yeah. And it's quite large. I think that was the other thing that was kind of daunting at first, but then just became like familiar.
Mhm.
That's the word I'll go with. So
Yeah, it's really good to see it again.
You don't believe yourself to be necessarily an artist. Is that true? Or have
no,
we
I still identify when people say that, oh, you must be an artist. I go, no, I'm an art therapist. That's always my rebuttal for sure. I just, through my own experience in life, that title got so garnered and languished to the point that I literally put an arm up away from it, even when I like, and I love photography and I've practiced as a photographer for a very long time. I rarely call myself an artist in that regard. I call myself a photographer. Um, but that's just my journey. So it doesn't mean that I don't think that if someone comes up to me and they tell me they're an artist, I am going to fan that fire as much as I can. But if someone is like me and really struggles with that title because of past experiences, that's okay too. I don't want that to be a reason that someone decides that art therapy is not for them. So yeah, that's definitely a reason that I go about it that way in my own practice and how I put myself out into the world of social media. Art class fucking sucked, man. I'm so like I hated it. I like always failed and I abandoned art class as soon as I could. I took everything else that I was good at. So yeah, I feel like the whole system of grading and perfection focus just kind of killed that will in me, but I found it through a different avenue now. Titles can be really daunting, really daunting. So if it, like I said, yeah, if it's something that someone is like really pumped about, like, oh, I'm an artist, I would love this. And I'm like, absolutely you would. Like, what's your medium? What would you explore if you could explore? Like, let's talk your language. But for those that are like, oh my God, I haven't touched a pencil and I skipped every art class I possibly could in high school until I didn't have to take it anymore, there's still an opportunity for you to engage and get something from art therapy for sure, because that's not what it's about. It's not about the same structure of like, today we are going to learn watercolor and we are going to work on this frame of reference that I am putting on the overhead projector that you have to match as aesthetically as you possibly can. Because I think part of the reason I struggled with art class, something just clicked. There was a light bulb there. Is that we were trying to so often fit a frame of reference of what was expected of us or an outcome rather than actually just getting to practice who we are on paper or on canvas or out of plasticine or clay. Like we were expected to target this outcome of art, and that to me is not really how art should work. As much as it's great that you can learn that way, but that's learning then. That's not the process of art making, because it's got to have a piece of you in it. You're not trying to carbon copy what you see in front of you. So yeah, that was a little ramble, but that I hope that answered your question a little bit.
I asked for it, so it's okay.
Yeah, I feel like you're gonna ask that of like we'll be old ladies sitting on a porch on Zoom recording episode 5672 of Junk Art Therapy, and you'll be like, "Are you identifying as an artist yet?"
I
You know?
just think I just think so many people have really deep wounds about art, and I mean I really feel so lucky when someone shares the moment when someone's artist soul was crushed, and I do think that it is something that we have such a wonderful opportunity to hear and to empathize with, because I think most people have at least one story where someone looked at a picture and basically told them they weren't good enough. And I think that that can be a great metaphor for the larger wounds that we might be carrying. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting. You don't need to be an artist to do art therapy. Um, but it is something for me. I'm like, I think that all of us just suffer such a great wound of where this part of what it like creativity is an activity that is what makes us human. It's one of the things that makes our brains unique And I mean, some animals seem creative to me too, but it's like that is when we shut down creativity, I think we really lose something very special in people. So if the title, and yeah, titles are hard, we need language to understand each other, but we are indeed very fluid as beings. So calling ourselves anything is also kind of a gray area. But I do think, yeah, that's probably, yeah, right. I'm always going to talk about the idea of the artist and the artist identity because I do think it is something that is very interesting that has been taken away and made into something else, and made that there is someone in our heads that we've gained from society that tells us whether we're good or bad. And yeah, I think we need to find a way to get rid of that thing and accept that we are all really artists. But I know we're not there yet.
That's okay. There's two parts you touched on there that I want to talk about. The first one being that you talked about how the three of us, Josée, Kristy, and Nat, we're all similar, but we also have our differences. And then we had a different moment there for sure. And we know that that's been a moment for as long as our friendship's been around. But that point of connection was still there because you said the same thing that I brought up earlier, where it's that creativity is innately human, right? And it's so good to like showcase and role model that like we can have differing opinions and differing experiences of that, but at its core we still truly believe in the same thing. And I think the other thing that I'm very curious about here that I think could be a really interesting little like side segue if we want to talk about it is the way you just talked about that whole your whole piece there, Kristy. It really, I immediately, and this is in the most loving way possible, I was like, oh, Kristy's such an existentialist. So I just wonder if this is a good moment to kind of like talk about, we talked about how we're all person-centered, we're all trauma-informed, but like, let's talk about kind of some of the differing aspects that maybe we have as regards to our practice. If you want. Like, I'm happy to talk about systems theory and how that informs my practice. It's something quite dear to me. If you feel like talking about existentialism.
I feel like this could be another time. Like we could prep for this.
Yeah.
Like I think I would love to give it more thought because essentially, like if someone were to say like, what's your whole shtick as an art therapist? Like what's your kind of central differentiating, what makes you unique? And for me, it's like the word welcome, like hanging out the welcome sign. Like I always think of myself as a proprietor of a space, like I'm running an inn and everybody's welcome, and everything is welcome, that we are all creative humans, and all we really need is to welcome the creative response in each of us, which is different. I like to think of it as like if we're all working with clay, we're all going to leave different handprints. Even if we're making a pot that's spinning on a wheel, like the geometry of my individual body leaves a print, and it's just like how I respond to the world is my creative response. Like that's the human. We're creative humans. Those are your words, Kristy. You say artist, but then you actually, when you're just talking to people, you're saying creative human, and you're making that creative response something that is innately human. And we can think about all the ways we do and don't express it, and why that is, why we used to, why we want to, how we would if we could, how we thought we should. I think about my own response to how do I practice, given I had to throw away all of my art training in order to be free enough to try anything. Like I had to paint in my first art therapy sessions with my fingers because I'd never really done that before in a fluid, playful, joy releasing, expressive, responsive way. I had been working on getting it right since the beginning. So, for me, it's like when I meet someone who is already deeply entrenched in their artist identity and they really want to take their deep training, discipline, capacity for control of a brush to express something very deep inside, I refer them to someone else, someone who has fine art training as well as great art therapy skills, because I really want them to be met where they're at and fly. For me, I tend to work with folks who are like rediscovering their creative capacity, maybe even using their hands for the first time in middle age, or teenagers who just basically need a place safe enough to even try, to even touch the materials again, because it's just been hard. And that's partly why I love working with people outdoors, because nature provides, you can just witness. Is it radical art making to just physically respond to beauty? And then maybe make eye contact with someone and be like, did you see that bird? I saw that bird. And it's like that creative response happens in your body, whether or not you capture it with materials, or whether you capture it with words, or just let the feeling pass through you. So yeah, it's interesting, right? The words we use, and where did we get those words? And I know that function, like we work in the world, and we want to be able to try to meet the medical model and what people's needs are and what they think they need and what they want. Like we're working across cultural kind of paradigms all the time. But really, in its essence, I think once any of us discover that we have a creative impulse that's innately our own, and that it belongs somewhere, even if it doesn't feel like it's always belonged, then stuff like kind of has its own momentum.
José's going to head up this next episode. So Josée, what do you got planned for us for next week?
I think my plan is to kind of give a different way into art therapy, in that maybe I'll offer an invitation to the three of us, and then we can go create art in the span of between now and the next recording, and we'll revisit the art that we've created.
I love that.
Works for you guys. I think that that's a good kind of follow-up intro, because it's now two different ways. If you really like listening to us banter and chatter and that sinks in for you, awesome. If you want a little bit more metaphor involved in there, well, let's look at some art. So yeah, I think and I think the invitation I want to offer is something really open-ended, which I love doing open-ended invitations, and that I just want to offer for us to create an art piece that reflects who we are as an art therapist.
Wide open.
Very. A wide open invitation is not necessarily something I will walk into day one and offer to someone, because it could be really daunting to know where to start. But I'm going to offer us something a lot more open, because I know we have the capacity to kind of work within that frame. And I think it gives us a really great opportunity to show some of the unique attributes we each bring to our art making. So I'm not going to direct a material. I'm not going to direct anything beyond that. There's no time cap, nothing. So
okay, sorry. So the invitation is create a piece of art that
represents who you are as an art therapist.
And this could be visual art, this could be poetry.
100%.
Yeah.
The world is your oyster.
Take the invitation, throw it in the back of your mind, and create something, and then find it in the speaking about it, how it relates to you as an art therapist, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. I like kind of often approaching invitations like this, and most invitations for myself, as an echo. I never look at them as a parameter, like a parentheses. It's never something I have to be contained within. It's something to give you a starting point, a launching point, a thread to follow. So whatever that should look like for you.
I like that. An echo. I kind of thought cast a shadow, but now I'm going with echo. I like that.
Wonderful. First episode finished. Well, thanks for listening today. And if you've had an experience with art therapy that stuck with you, or if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the comments or send us an email, junkarttherapy@gmail.com. That's it for this week.
I'm Josée.
I'm Nat.
I'm Kristy. Don't forget, sometimes the best treasures are disguised as junk.